I need to check my account balance. A homeless man stood at the counter of First Metropolitan Bank, 34 years old, worn-out boots held together with duct tape, a coat fastened with safety pins, layers of grime and 2 decades of street life marking every weathered line of his face. His hands, calloused and dirt-stained, clutched a crumpled piece of paper with an account number scrawled in fading ink. Maurice Parks stopped mid-conversation with his VIP tour group. He looked the man up and down slowly, then his face split into a wide, theatrical grin. "Check your account?" His voice carried across the polished Italian marble lobby, deliberately loud. "This is First Metropolitan Bank, not a homeless shelter." Maurice Parks stepped closer, his designer suit immaculate, his Rolex catching the overhead lights. The scent of expensive cologne announced his presence before his shadow fell across Jonathan West's face. "Look at those boots. Look at that smell." He gestured dramatically to the group of wealthy investors behind him. "Another vagrant thinking he can waltz into a private banking institution like he owns the place." He turned back to Jonathan, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that somehow carried through the entire lobby. "You don't belong here. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." The security guard's hand moved to his belt. A well-dressed woman from the VIP group called out from behind. "Just remove him already. He's making us all uncomfortable." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the lobby. Cruel smirks, nervous laughter, the unified judgment of the wealthy against one man in rags. No one objected. Not one single person stepped forward. Not one voice rose in defense. But not one of them, not Maurice Parks, not his wealthy investors, not the security guard with his hand already reaching for Jonathan's shoulder, could have imagined what would happen next. Within 30 minutes, Maurice Parks would be begging not for money, but for his career. Within an hour, the CEO of First Metropolitan would be on a private jet, racing to this very branch, desperate to undo what his manager had done. Jonathan West didn't run. He didn't shout. He stood perfectly still, his eyes calm, carrying a weight that no one in that lobby recognized. "Sir," Jonathan said quietly, his voice rough from years on the streets, but steady as stone. "I have an account here. I need to access it today. There's a foreclosure I need to stop." Maurice Parks threw his head back and laughed, looking around at his audience, playing to the crowd like an actor on stage. "A foreclosure?" He repeated the word mockingly. "Let me guess, you're about to lose your cardboard box under the highway overpass?" The VIP investors chuckled. One of them, a man in a navy suit with slicked back hair, grinned and muttered something to the woman beside him. She laughed behind her hand. James Porter, the senior teller, leaned over his station, his face twisted with contempt. "Mr. Parks, should I call the police? This man is clearly mentally unstable." Maurice waved his hand dismissively. "Not yet. Let's see what kind of fantasy he's living in first." He stepped even closer to Jonathan, invading his space. "Show me this account of yours. Let's all have a good laugh before security drags you out." Jonathan reached into his coat slowly, carefully, aware that any sudden movement could end him on the floor in handcuffs. He pulled out the crumpled paper and held it out. Maurice snatched it from his hand, examined it with exaggerated skepticism, holding it up to the light as if checking for watermarks. "An account number," Maurice announced to his audience, "on what looks like a piece of trash he fished out of a dumpster." He squinted at the faded numbers. This could literally be anything. A phone number, a lottery ticket, a figment of his imagination. "It's a real account," Jonathan said. His voice didn't waver. 20 years old. I haven't touched it since I opened it." 20 years? Oh, this keeps getting better."
He turned to the VIP group. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a secret millionaire here. 20 years of compound interest on his, what, $5? Laughter erupted again. The investors were eating it up. This was better than any bank tour they'd been on. But something about Jonathan's face made Maurice pause. There was no fear there, no shame, no desperation, just patience, the look of someone waiting for something inevitable to arrive.
Maurice shook off the strange feeling. Prejudice is a powerful drug. It makes you blind to what's standing right in front of you. "You know what?" Maurice said, his voice dripping with false generosity. "I'm going to do something special for you today. I'm going to check this account right here, right now." He pointed to the giant monitor mounted on the wall behind the main counter, the screen normally reserved for displaying stock tickers and bank promotions. "In fact, I'm going to put it up on that big screen so everyone in this lobby can see what happens when you waste First Metropolitan's time." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "That's not necessary." "Oh, but I insist." Maurice's smile was pure venom. "Transparency is one of our core values here. Everyone should see exactly what you have, or rather, what you don't have." He grabbed Jonathan's arm, not gently, and pulled him toward the main counter. The VIP investors followed, like spectators at a public execution. Other customers stopped their transactions to watch. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Maurice sat down at the terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard, with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to prove a point. He glanced back at Jonathan with a smirk. "When this screen shows 0, and it will, you're leaving in handcuffs, trespassing, harassment. Maybe we'll add fraud to the list. How does that sound?" Jonathan said nothing. He simply stood there, his worn-out boots planted firmly on the marble floor, his eyes locked on Maurice Parks with an expression that could have been pity. Maurice entered the account number from the crumpled paper, hit enter. The system began to load. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maurice announced like a ringmaster, "prepare to witness the most expensive lesson in humility this vagrant has ever received." The loading icon spun on the giant monitor. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the screen changed. First came the account type, appearing in bold letters across the top of the display. "Founders Tier Account, Priority Access, Tier 1. Maurice's smile faltered just for a second. The VIP investors leaned forward, confused. Then the balance loaded. $120,347,892.14. The lobby went silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from shock, but the kind that comes from a fundamental break in reality. The kind of silence that falls when everything you thought you knew turns out to be wrong. Maurice Parks stared at the screen. His face went white, then red, then white again. Someone in the VIP group whispered, "That can't be real?" But it was real, and the bank's systems knew it. All across the branch, computer terminals began to ping. A red banner appeared on every screen. "Alert! Tier 1 founder on premises. Notify executive leadership immediately. Priority protocol initiated." Maurice's phone started vibrating in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. "CEO Marcus Richardson, calling." He looked at Jonathan West, at the homeless man in the duct-taped boots, and for the first time in his entire career, Maurice Parks felt what it was like to be small. Jonathan West stood in that marble lobby, surrounded by silence and stares and the wreckage of Maurice's arrogance, and finally spoke again. "Now," Jonathan said quietly, "about that foreclosure." Maurice Parks had been waiting for a moment like this all morning. The VIP tour group from Sanderson Capital Management, 12 potential high-net-worth clients worth a combined $300 million in assets, had been inspecting his branch for the past 40 minutes, and so far everything had been disappointingly routine. Polished floors, efficient tellers, clean bathrooms, updated security systems. Professional, yes. Memorable, no.
He needed something to make them remember First Metropolitan Bank, something that would demonstrate his leadership, his decisiveness, his unwillingness to tolerate anything that might compromise the exclusive atmosphere they promised their elite clientele. Then Jonathan West walked through the door. Maurice saw him before the security guard did, the duct-taped boots leaving faint smudges on the Italian marble, the coat held together with safety pins, the weathered hands clutching some crumpled paper like it was a treasure map. The smell, even from 30 feet away, Maurice could imagine it. Street grime and desperation and failure. Perfect. Maurice held up one hand, stopping mid-sentence in his explanation of their client retention metrics. The VIP investors turned to follow his gaze. He watched their faces shift, mild curiosity turning to discomfort, then distaste, then a kind of fascinated revulsion, like watching a car accident they couldn't look away from. "Excuse me for one moment," Maurice said, his voice carrying just the right note of professional concern mixed with barely concealed irritation. "It appears we have a situation that requires immediate attention." He straightened his tie, checked his Rolex, a gift from the regional director after last quarter's performance, and started across the lobby. His shoes clicked against the marble with authority. Behind him he could hear the investors whispering, "Good. Let them watch. Let them see how First Metropolitan handled security threats." Because that's what this was, wasn't it? A security threat, an intruder, someone who didn't belong in their temple of wealth and power. The security guard, Marcus Webb, had already intercepted the homeless man near the entrance. Marcus's hand was on the man's shoulder, not forcefully, but firmly, the universal gesture of, "You're not welcome here." But Marcus was hesitating, his face uncertain, probably because the homeless man wasn't resisting or causing a scene. He was just standing there with that crumpled paper, waiting. That wouldn't do. Uncertainty was weakness. The VIP investors needed to see strength. "Is there a problem here, Marcus?" Maurice asked, his voice pitched to carry across the lobby. Several other customers looked up from their transactions. Perfect. The bigger the audience, the better the lesson. Marcus looked relieved to have backup. "Sir, this gentleman was attempting to—" "I need to check my account balance," the homeless man said quietly. Maurice let the silence hang for a beat. 2 beats, 3, building the moment. Then he let himself smile. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse. "Check your account." He repeated the words slowly, tasting each syllable. He turned slightly, making sure the VIP investors could see his face, could appreciate the performance. "This is First Metropolitan Bank, not a homeless shelter." One of the investors, a woman in a cream Chanel suit named Victoria Ashford, let out a small nervous laugh. That was all the permission the others needed. More laughter rippled through the group. Not loud, not cruel yet, just the sophisticated chuckle of people who recognized they were witnessing something entertaining. Maurice stepped closer to the homeless man, invading his space deliberately. The smell was worse up close. Unwashed clothes, stale sweat, something else underneath that might have been alcohol or just the accumulated stench of sleeping rough. He let his nose wrinkle slightly, making sure everyone saw his disgust. "Look at those boots," Maurice said, his voice carrying. "Look at that coat. You think we serve people who can't even afford proper clothing?" He gestured to the VIP group, including him in his performance. "These fine people represent hundreds of millions in assets. This bank caters to a certain caliber of client. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The homeless man's eyes stayed level, calm, almost pitying. That look irritated Maurice more than anything else. How dare this vagrant look at him like that? "I have an account here," the man said. His voice was rough but steady. "I need to access it. It's urgent." Maurice laughed, throwing his head back. Behind him he could hear more laughter from the investors, from other customers. The whole lobby was becoming his stage, and he was the star. "An account? Did everyone hear that?" Maurice spun in a slow circle, arms spread wide. This gentleman claims to have an account at First Metropolitan. 20 years on the streets by the look of him, but apparently he's one of our valued customers." Victoria Ashford was recording on her phone now. Good. Let her. This would make a great story at their next board meeting. The branch manager who wasn't afraid to protect the integrity of his institution. Maurice turned back to the homeless man, his smile sharpening into something cruel. "You know what? I'm going to do something special for you today. I'm going to personally verify this account of yours." Pause for effect. "But when it doesn't exist, and it won't, you're leaving in handcuffs. Sound fair?" The homeless man didn't flinch. "That sounds fair." Something about that calm acceptance should have warned Maurice, should have made him stop and think. But he was too caught up in the moment, too focused on his audience, too convinced of his own correctness. "Excellent," Maurice said, already reaching for the crumpled paper in the man's hand. "Let's give everyone here a show they'll never forget." He had no idea how right he was.
Jonathan reached into the inner pocket of his coat slowly, carefully, his movements deliberate enough that Marcus Webb's hand didn't move toward his baton. The coat was held together with 3 safety pins and what looked like a shoelace threaded through a torn seam. As Jonathan's hand emerged, Maurice caught a glimpse of more layers underneath, a flannel shirt, another shirt beneath that, the survival uniform of someone who'd learned that warmth comes from layers, not quality. The paper Jonathan pulled out looked like it had been through a war, creased and recreased 100 times, stained with something that might have been coffee or rainwater or both. The edges were soft, almost fuzzy, like fabric. One corner had been torn off and taped back on with yellowed Scotch tape that was barely holding. Maurice's eyes lit up. This was even better than he'd hoped. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, plucking the paper from Jonathan's fingers before the man could fully extend his arm, "behold the official documentation of our esteemed client." He held the paper up high, turning it slowly so everyone could see. The VIP investors leaned in, squinting. Victoria Ashford zoomed in with her phone camera. A few other customers had stopped their transactions entirely, drawn by the spectacle. Maurice made a show of examining the paper closely, holding it up to the light streaming through the bank's floor-to-ceiling windows. He tilted his head, pursed his lips, furrowed his brow like an art critic studying a forgery. "Fascinating," he said. "The paper stock alone tells us so much. I'd estimate this came from a recycling bin, perhaps a dumpster behind a fast food restaurant." He pretended to sniff it. "Yes, I'm detecting notes of discarded hamburger wrapper with hints of yesterday's rain." Laughter erupted from the VIP group. One of the men, a silver-haired investor named Richard Chen, actually applauded. Maurice felt a surge of satisfaction. This was going perfectly. "And the handwriting," Maurice continued, tracing his finger over the faded numbers, "such elegant penmanship. The shaky hand of someone who wrote this while sitting on a park bench, perhaps, or maybe in the back of a public library during one of those blessed hours when they let the homeless come inside to escape the cold." The numbers were barely legible. Someone had written them in blue ballpoint pen that had faded to a grayish blue, the ink breaking up in places where the paper's surface had been damaged. There were 11 digits in total, and Maurice squinted to make them out. Some of the numbers could have been 6s or 8s, 3s or 5s. The paper had been folded and unfolded so many times that white lines crisscrossed the digits like a road map. "Can you even read that?" Chelsea Morrison, the senior teller, had wandered over from her station, drawn by the entertainment. "It looks like it went through a washing machine." "Several washing machines," Maurice agreed. He looked at Jonathan with exaggerated sympathy. "Sir, I have to ask, did you find this? Is this perhaps a piece of trash you discovered and convinced yourself was important?" Jonathan's face remained impassive. "I wrote those numbers myself, 20 years ago.
the day I opened the account." Maurice's eyebrows shot up dramatically. 20 years, he turned to his audience again, shaking his head in wonder. Do we all hear that? This gentleman claims he opened an account here 20 years ago and has been carefully preserving this vital document ever since. In his pocket, Richard Chen added helpfully, through 20 years of living on the streets. Exactly, Maurice pointed at Richard like a game show host acknowledging a correct answer. Through rain, snow, heat, humidity, through sleeping under bridges and in shelters and doorways, this man somehow managed to keep this precious scrap of paper safe. He held the paper up again. This isn't financial documentation, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we in the banking industry call a fantasy, a delusion, a homeless person's lottery ticket. More laughter. Maurice was on a roll now. He felt like a comedian who'd found his rhythm, the audience eating out of his hand. "Let me guess the story," said Maurice, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial tone. 20 years ago, when you still had a job, when you still had a home, you walked into a bank, maybe even this bank, and you opened an account. You put in your paycheck, maybe a few $100s, maybe 1,000 if you were lucky. And then life happened. You lost the job, lost the home, lost everything. But in your mind, somewhere deep down, you told yourself that money was still there, waiting, multiplying, that someday you'd come back and claim your fortune. He paused for effect, his voice dropping even lower. That's the fantasy, isn't it? That somewhere out there, there's still a piece of your old life waiting, a safety net, a way back, one account number on one crumpled piece of paper, and suddenly you're not homeless anymore. You're just temporarily displaced. The mockery in his voice was vicious now, cutting. Several of the VIP investors had stopped smiling. Victoria Ashford had lowered her phone slightly, her expression uncomfortable. But Maurice didn't notice. He was too focused on the homeless man's face, waiting for the crack, the moment when the fantasy would shatter and the man would break. But Jonathan West just stood there, his eyes steady, his voice quiet when he finally spoke. "The account number is real. Check it." Maurice's smile returned, sharper than ever. "Oh, I intend to. In fact, I'm going to do something special, something I think everyone here will appreciate." He walked toward the main counter, the crumpled paper held high like a trophy. The VIP investors followed, and behind them came several curious customers, forming a small crowd. "I'm going to pull this up on our main display screen, that big, beautiful monitor right there, so everyone can see, crystal clear, no doubt, no ambiguity, exactly what this account contains." He sat down at the terminal, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He looked back at Jonathan one last time. "When this shows 0, you're leaving in handcuffs. Agreed?" Jonathan nodded slowly. Check the account. Maurice's fingers flew across the keyboard, already composing the speech he'd give after the 0 appeared. Something about the tragedy of mental illness, something about the importance of security, something that would make him look both strong and compassionate. He entered the numbers from the crumpled paper and hit enter with a flourish. Let's see what 20 years of fantasy looks like.
The giant monitor mounted on the wall behind the main counter was 42 inches of high-definition glory, normally reserved for displaying stock market tickers, promotional videos about wealth management services, and the occasional corporate message from headquarters. Maurice had always thought it was an ostentatious touch, too showy, too Vegas casino, not refined enough for a proper financial institution. But right now, at this exact moment, he loved that screen with every fiber of his being. "You know what?" Maurice stood up from the terminal, his hand still resting on the keyboard. He turned to face his audience with the smile of a man about to deliver a masterstroke. "I think everyone here deserves to see this. Complete transparency. That's what First Metropolitan stands for, isn't it? He gestured grandly toward the massive screen. James, can you please sync my terminal to the main display? I want our guests' account information visible to everyone in this lobby. James Porter, the senior teller, hesitated for just a fraction of a second. His eyes darted from Maurice to Jonathan, then back again. Sir, are you sure that's— I'm absolutely certain, Maurice cut him off. Our friend here wants to check his balance. Let's make sure he gets the full First Metropolitan experience. Nothing hidden, nothing private, just pure, unfiltered truth. James's fingers moved across his keyboard. The stock ticker on the giant screen flickered, then disappeared. The monitor went black for a moment before displaying the First Metropolitan logo, then the words, "Account Inquiry in Progress." Victoria Ashford had her phone out again, recording. The other VIP investors had formed a semicircle around Maurice's desk, their faces displaying a range of emotions. Richard Chen looked entertained, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. A younger woman named Amanda Cross had her arms folded, her expression uncertain. Another investor, Marcus Rodriguez, kept glancing at the door as if calculating the distance to the exit. But none of them left. None of them said, "This isn't appropriate." None of them suggested that maybe, just maybe, this was going too far. The regular customers were watching too. An older black man in a cardigan had abandoned his deposit slip to drift closer. A middle-aged woman in yoga clothes stood near the rope barrier, her eyes wide. Even the other tellers had paused their work, drawn to the spectacle like moths to a flame. Maurice felt the energy in the room, the collective holding of breath, the delicious anticipation of watching someone else's humiliation from a safe distance. This was what power felt like. Not money. Money was just numbers on a screen. Real power was the ability to make a room full of people stop what they were doing and pay attention to you. "Now then," Maurice said, settling back into his chair with theatrical slowness, "let's see what we're dealing with. James, you have me synced?" "Yes, sir. Whatever you pull up will display on the main screen." "Perfect." Maurice's fingers returned to the keyboard. He made a show of cracking his knuckles first, like a pianist preparing for a difficult piece. Someone in the crowd chuckled. Jonathan West stood perfectly still near the counter, his worn-out boots planted firmly on the marble floor. His hands hung loose at his sides. His face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, no shame. Just a kind of patient waiting, like someone standing on a bus stop who knows the bus will eventually come. That calm irritated Maurice more than any protest would have. He wanted to see the crack, the moment when reality broke through whatever delusion this homeless man had been living in. He wanted to see the exact second when Jonathan West realized he had nothing, was nothing, and would always be nothing. "Account number," Maurice announced to his audience, reading from the crumpled paper. "Let's see here. I can barely make these out. The number 6, or is that an 8? Sir, your penmanship is atrocious." More laughter from the crowd. "But let's assume it's a 6. And this one definitely a 3, or possibly a 5. Hard to tell through 20 years of grime and delusion." He entered the numbers slowly, calling out each digit like a bingo caller. 2, 7, 9, 4, 6, 3, 1, 8, 8, 7, 5. His finger hovered over the enter key. He looked up at the giant screen, at his audience, at Jonathan West. "When this screen shows 0, he said, his voice dropping into something almost gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it crueler. "I want everyone here to understand what we're witnessing. This isn't just about a homeless man wasting our time. This is about mental illness. This is about the tragedy of people who live so long in fantasy that they lose touch with reality entirely." He glanced at Jonathan. "This is about delusion." Amanda Cross shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should— This is important, Maurice cut her off. This is a teaching moment. Everyone in this lobby needs to understand that First Metropolitan doesn't tolerate fraud, doesn't tolerate deception, and doesn't tolerate people who try to take advantage of our goodwill. He pressed enter. The loading icon appeared on the giant screen, a spinning circle of blue and white, rotating slowly, once, twice, 3 times. The lobby held its collective breath. Maurice leaned back in his chair, already preparing his victory speech, something compassionate, something about how the bank would be happy to provide information about local shelters and mental health services, something that would make him look magnanimous in victory. The loading icon spun a 4th time. Then the screen changed, and Maurice Parks's entire world shifted on its axis. The loading icon spun on the giant screen, blue and white rotating in its endless circle. 5 seconds passed, then 10. The bank's system was searching through millions of accounts, cross-referencing the 11 digits Maurice had entered against every record in the database. Maurice drummed his fingers on the desk, the sound loud in the waiting silence. He looked up at Jonathan West with a smile that had gone from theatrical to genuinely cruel. "You know what I think about while we wait?" Maurice said, his voice carrying across the lobby. "I think about all the places you could be right now instead of wasting everyone's time here. There's a shelter on 4th Street, isn't there? St. Mary's Mission? They serve dinner at 5. You're going to miss it at this rate." The loading icon continued its slow rotation. 15 seconds now. Jonathan said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on Maurice with that same unreadable expression. Not quite pity, not quite contempt, something else entirely that Maurice couldn't identify and didn't like. "Or maybe you prefer the streets," Maurice continued, leaning back in his chair. "I've heard the underpass on Highway 9 is popular. Dry when it rains, relatively safe. That where you're staying tonight after we're done here and security escorts you out?" 20 seconds. The crowd was getting restless. Victoria Ashford had lowered her phone slightly. Richard Chen checked his watch. Maurice's smile widened. "Unless, of course, you're staying in jail. That's a real possibility here. Trespassing, fraud, wasting police time. That's a warm bed for the night, at least. 3 meals a day. Might be an upgrade from wherever you're sleeping now." Jonathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was all. No words, no movement, just that tiny shift in his face that Maurice almost missed. 25 seconds. The loading icon spun. "James," Maurice called out, not taking his eyes off Jonathan, "how long does this usually take?" "Depends on the account age, sir," James replied from his station. His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Older accounts, dormant accounts, they can take longer to pull up. The system has to search the archive database." "Ah, the archive. That's where they keep the dead accounts, the abandoned ones, the ones that have been sitting empty for so long the bank almost forgot they existed." He tilted his head at Jonathan. "Is that what we're going to find? An account from 20 years ago that's been sitting at 0 for 2 decades? 30 seconds. Amanda Cross shifted her weight from foot to foot. "Maybe we should—" "Patience," Maurice said smoothly. "Good things come to those who wait. Or in this case, justice comes to those who wait." The black man in the cardigan had wandered closer, squinting at the screen. The woman in yoga clothes was filming on her phone now, too. This was going to be all over social media within the hour. Maurice could already see the headlines. "Bank manager exposes homeless fraud." His phone would be ringing off the hook with interview requests. 35 seconds. "You're very quiet," Maurice observed, studying Jonathan's face. "Most people in your position would be explaining themselves right now, making excuses, telling sad stories about how they ended up here. But you're just standing there, silent as a stone. Why is that?" Jonathan's eyes didn't waver. He didn't blink. He just watched Maurice with that maddeningly calm expression, like someone watching a child have a tantrum, waiting for it to tire itself out. That look made Maurice's skin crawl. He covered his discomfort with another laugh. "Maybe you're in shock. Maybe you're finally realizing that your fantasy is about to shatter. That loading screen is searching every account in our system, and when it comes back empty, you're going to have to face reality. No secret fortune, no hidden account, just you and those duct-taped boots and a one-way trip to either a shelter or a jail cell. 45 seconds. The loading icon continued its hypnotic rotation. Marcus Webb, the security guard, had moved closer. His hand rested on his belt, ready. Several other customers had formed a loose cluster near the main counter, all eyes on the giant screen. The entire bank had become a theater, and everyone was waiting for the final act. "I've been in banking 15 years, Maurice said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. 15 years, and you know what I've learned? I've learned that people lie. They lie about their income, their assets, their creditworthiness. They lie because they're desperate or delusional or both. And the biggest liars? The ones who claim to have accounts they can't possibly have. The ones who walk in looking like, well, like you look, and expect us to believe they're secretly millionaires." 45 seconds. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice so quiet that Maurice almost missed it. "The account is real. We'll see. We're about to see very clearly." 50 seconds. The loading icon spun and spun and spun. Then it stopped. The screen flickered. Maurice leaned forward, his smile already forming, the words already on his tongue about calling the police, about the importance of protecting our institution from fraud. The screen populated with text. Maurice's smile froze on his face. His breath caught in his throat, and the entire lobby seemed to tilt sideways as reality reasserted itself in a way that none of them had expected. The first thing that appeared on the screen wasn't a number. It was a designation, rendered in bold capital letters across the top of the display. Founders Tier Account. Maurice blinked. His smile remained fixed on his face, but something flickered behind his eyes. Confusion, just a flash of it, quickly suppressed. "Founders Tier?" he said slowly, his voice still carrying that mocking lilt, but with less certainty now. That's probably just a classification error. The system sometimes..." The second line appeared. "Priority Access Tier 1. The lobby had gone quiet. Not the anticipatory quiet from before, but something heavier. The kind of silence that falls when people sense something has gone wrong, but can't quite identify what. Richard Chen leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Wait, what's Tier 1? James Porter's voice came from across the counter, barely above a whisper. "Tier 1 that's reserved for founding investors, people who helped capitalize the bank when it was first established. There are only 12 Tier 1 accounts in the entire system." Maurice's hands gripped the edge of his desk. "That can't be right. James, there's obviously a glitch. The account number must have pulled up the wrong..." The third line materialized on the screen. "Account holder, West, Jonathan M." Maurice's mouth opened. No sound came out. Victoria Ashford lowered her phone slowly. Amanda Cross took a step backward, her hand moving to cover her mouth. Then the numbers began to load. They appeared one digit at a time, filling in from left to right like a slot machine in excruciating slow motion. First the $sign, then the 1, then the 2, then the 0. $120. Maurice made a sound in his throat, something between a cough and a gasp. The comma appeared, then the 3, then the 4, then the 7. $120,347. Someone in the crowd said, "Oh my God," very quietly. The next comma loaded, then the 8, then the 9, then the 2. $120,347,892. Maurice's face had gone white, not pale, white, the color of printer paper. His mouth hung open, his expensive cologne suddenly seeming cloying in the air-conditioned lobby. His Rolex caught the light as his hand trembled against the desk. The decimal point appeared, then the final 2 digits. $120,347,892.14. The silence in the lobby wasn't silence anymore. It was the complete absence of sound, as if every person in the room had simultaneously forgotten how to breathe. The air conditioning hummed. Someone's phone buzzed. Those sounds seemed deafening in the vacuum. Maurice stared at the screen. His smile had died on his face, leaving behind something that wasn't quite an expression at all. His jaw was slack, his eyes were wide, his skin had taken on a grayish tinge beneath the white. "That's not—" he started. His voice cracked. "That can't be—" But it was, and everyone in the lobby could see it. The black man in the cardigan let out a long, slow breath. The woman in yoga clothes had stopped recording, her phone dangling forgotten in her hand, her eyes fixed on the screen like she was witnessing something supernatural. Richard Chen's face had gone from amused to stunned to something approaching horror as the implications began to sink in. Victoria Ashford's phone was still pointed at the screen, still recording, but her hand was shaking so badly the image would be unusable. Marcus Rodriguez had gone pale. Amanda Cross had taken another step back, then another, putting distance between herself and Maurice as if he'd suddenly become radioactive. James Porter was standing at his station, both hands flat on his desk, staring at his computer terminal, where the same information was displayed. His mouth moved, forming silent words that might have been prayers or curses or just shocked repetition of the numbers. Chelsea Morrison had gone completely still behind her counter, her face frozen in an expression of dawning dread. And Jonathan West stood exactly where he'd been standing for the past 5 minutes, his duct-taped boots planted on the marble floor, his safety-pinned coat hanging from his weathered frame, his hands loose at his sides, his face calm, his eyes locked on Maurice Parks with that same unreadable expression that now, in hindsight, looked less like patience and more like the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly how this was going to end. Maurice tried to speak again. There must be some kind of— James, check the system for— A sound cut him off. A pinging noise, sharp and insistent, coming from James's computer terminal, then from Chelsea's, then from every terminal in the bank, a cascade of alerts firing simultaneously. James looked down at his screen. His face went even paler than Maurice's. "Sir, there's an automatic alert. The system just sent a notification to—" Maurice's phone started vibrating in his pocket, not a gentle buzz, a sustained, angry vibration that meant someone was calling and wasn't going to stop calling until he answered. Maurice pulled out his phone with shaking hands. The screen displayed a name that made his stomach drop into his shoes. CEO Marcus Richardson calling. The phone vibrated in his palm like a live thing, angry and demanding. Maurice stared at the answer, then at the screen, then at Jonathan West. The homeless man with $120 million smiled for the first time since entering the bank. It wasn't a cruel smile. It wasn't triumphant. It was sad, almost gentle. The smile of someone who'd just proven a point he desperately hoped wouldn't be proven. "You should probably answer that," Jonathan said quietly. Maurice's phone continued to vibrate. The pinging alerts continued throughout the bank. The number on the giant screen seemed to glow. And in the marble lobby of First Metropolitan Bank, surrounded by VIP investors and security guards and silent customers, Maurice Parks realized he'd just made the worst mistake of his entire career. His thumb hovered over the decline button, some primitive part of his brain screaming at him to make this go away, to pretend it wasn't happening, to somehow rewind the last 5 minutes and make different choices. But the pinging wouldn't stop. Every computer terminal in the bank was singing the same urgent song, a cascade of alerts that turned heads throughout the lobby. James Porter stared at his screen with the expression of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. Chelsea Morrison had both hands pressed flat against her desk as if bracing for impact. Even the regular customers had noticed something was wrong, the way animals sense an earthquake before it hits. Maurice's phone stopped vibrating. 3 seconds of blessed silence. Then it started again. Same name, same insistent demand. "Sir," James called across the counter, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Sir, you need to see this. The system just sent automatic notifications to—" He swallowed hard. "To everyone. Regional directors, corporate office, legal department, the entire executive board." Victoria Ashford had lowered her phone completely now. Her face had gone from entertained to horrified to something approaching professional calculation, the look of someone trying to figure out how to distance herself from what she'd just witnessed. She took a small step backward, then another, putting space between herself and Maurice as if his catastrophic failure might be contagious. Richard Chen wasn't smiling anymore. His hand had moved to his own phone, probably already composing a message to his partners at Sanderson Capital Management, explaining why they should reconsider their relationship with First Metropolitan Bank. Amanda Cross had her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes darting between Maurice and Jonathan like she was watching a tennis match played with hand grenades. Maurice's phone started vibrating for a third time. His hand shook as he brought it to his ear. "Hello?" His voice came out as a croak. "Maurice." The CEO's voice was ice wrapped in silk. Marcus Richardson didn't shout. He didn't need to. The man had built his career on the ability to convey absolute authority through tone alone. "I'm going to ask you a very simple question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Is Jonathan West currently standing in your branch?" Maurice's eyes flicked to Jonathan, who stood exactly where he'd been standing for the past 10 minutes, watching, waiting, that same unreadable expression on his weathered face. "Yes, sir," Maurice whispered. A long silence on the other end of the line. Maurice could hear papers rustling, the muted sound of other voices in the background. The corporate office 3 states away, suddenly very interested in what was happening in this small branch, in this small city. Marcus Richardson continued, his voice dropping even lower. "And did you," Marcus Richardson continued, his voice dropping even lower, "did you publicly display a Tier 1 founder's account on a public screen?" Maurice's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The giant screen behind him still showed the numbers, burning into the retinas of everyone in the lobby. $120 million and 14 cents. "Maurice, I'm looking at the security camera feed right now, the one that streams directly to corporate. So I'm going to ask again, and I suggest you answer carefully. Did you display a Tier 1 founder's account on a public screen?" "I didn't know," Maurice started. "You didn't know," Richardson's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "You didn't know that when a system alerts you that you're accessing a founder's account, that means something. You didn't know that Priority Access Tier 1 is reserved for exactly 12 people who helped capitalize this bank 30 years ago. You didn't know that Jonathan West is a legend in this city, or that his wife Eleanor was on our original board of directors before she passed." Each sentence hit like a physical blow. Maurice felt his knees weaken. He grabbed the edge of his desk to keep from falling. "Sir, I can explain." "You will explain. To me, in person. I'm already in the car to the airport. I'll be there in 4 hours. Richardson paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "Until I arrive, you are suspended. You will escort Mr. West to the VIP suite immediately. You will offer him anything he requests: coffee, water, a private office, access to our senior wealth management team. And, Maurice?" "Yes, sir?" "You will apologize." The line went dead. Maurice lowered his phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The CEO's final word, apologize, echoed in his skull like a death sentence. He opened his mouth, trying to form words that might begin to undo the catastrophe he'd created, when a voice cut through the silence. "My God!" It came from the back of the VIP group, sharp and breathless. "Jonathan West?" An older woman pushed through the cluster of investors. She was perhaps 70, silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing a navy suit that spoke of old money rather than new. Her hand was pressed to her chest, her eyes wide and fixed on Jonathan with an expression somewhere between shock and recognition. "The Jonathan West?" She took another step forward, her voice rising. "It can't be! You disappeared 20 years ago. We all thought—" She stopped, her hand moving from her chest to cover her mouth. Richard Chen frowned, looking from the woman to Jonathan and back again. "Margaret, what are you talking about? Who is Jonathan West?" Margaret Ashford, Victoria's mother, Maurice realized with a sinking feeling, ignored the question. She was staring at Jonathan like she'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, she had. "Eleanor. Oh, God, Eleanor. Your wife. I was at the funeral. The whole city was there." Her eyes glistened with sudden tears. "And then you just vanished. No one knew what happened to you. There were search parties, missing person reports. Some people thought you'd—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jonathan's expression shifted for the first time since entering the bank. Something in his weathered face softened, a crack in the stone revealing the man underneath. "Margaret Ashford, you worked with Eleanor on the Children's Hospital project." "I did." Margaret's voice trembled. "She was brilliant. She was my friend." She looked at Jonathan's duct-taped boots, his safety-pinned coat, the years of street life carved into every line of his face. "What happened to you?" The lobby had gone silent again, but this was a different kind of silence, not the shocked silence of the balance reveal, but something heavier, the silence of people realizing they'd been spectators to something far more tragic than they had understood. "Who is Jonathan West?" Victoria asked quietly, her phone still recording though her hand had dropped to her side. Margaret turned to the group, her professional composure struggling to reassert itself over her obvious emotion. 23 years ago, Jonathan West was the most celebrated architect in this city, perhaps in the entire state. She gestured vaguely toward the bank's floor-to-ceiling windows, toward the skyline beyond. The Meridian Tower downtown, that was his. The Performing Arts Center on 5th Street. The public library that won all those national awards. Half the buildings that define this city's identity came from his mind. Richard Chen's face had gone pale. The Meridian Tower? That Jonathan West? He and his wife Eleanor were partners in every sense. She handled the social impact, the community integration. He handled the design. Together, they were unstoppable. Every building they created was functional art that served the public good. She looked back at Jonathan, her voice dropping. And then Eleanor got sick. Cancer. It took her in 6 months. Amanda Cross had tears running down her face now, though she seemed unaware of them. The black man in the cardigan had removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. The funeral was standing room only. Every architect, every city planner, every person whose life had been touched by their work. And Jonathan gave the eulogy. He talked about how Eleanor believed buildings should serve people, not the other way around. How architecture was an act of love for humanity. She turned to Maurice, her voice hardening. And then he walked out of that church and disappeared. His firm searched for him. The police searched. Private investigators. Nothing. It was like he'd become a ghost. "I wanted to become a ghost," Jonathan said quietly. His voice carried across the marble lobby, rough but steady. Eleanor believed in people, in their fundamental goodness, their capacity for compassion. When she died, I needed to know if she was right. If I stripped away everything, the name, the reputation, the money, the architecture, would anyone still see me as human? Or would they see what Mr. Parks saw, a problem to be removed? The glass doors of First Metropolitan Bank burst open 20 minutes later with enough force to make everyone in the lobby jump. A woman in her mid-40s strode in, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Her suit was immaculate, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, and her face carried the expression of someone who'd just driven 90 miles an hour through 3 red lights and didn't care who knew it. Mr. West. She didn't even glance at Maurice. Her eyes locked onto Jonathan like a heat-seeking missile. I'm Patricia Vasquez, Regional Director for First Metropolitan. On behalf of this institution, I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies for what has happened here today. She crossed the lobby in 6 purposeful strides, her hand extended. Jonathan looked at it for a long moment before accepting the handshake. His calloused, dirt-stained fingers disappeared into her manicured grip. Mr. Parks, Patricia said without looking at Maurice, you are suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. You are not to speak to Mr. West, any customers, or any staff. HR will contact you within 24 hours regarding the investigation into your conduct. Maurice made a sound like a wounded animal. Ms. Vasquez, please, if you'll just let me explain. There is nothing to explain. Patricia's voice could have cut glass. I've reviewed the security footage, every second of it. Now leave. Marcus Webb stepped forward, his hand on Maurice's elbow, no longer deferential but firm. Maurice looked around the lobby one last time, at the VIP investors who wouldn't meet his eyes, at the giant screen still displaying Jonathan's balance, at the man in duct-taped boots who had destroyed his career simply by existing. Then Marcus led him away, and Maurice Parks walked out of First Metropolitan Bank for the last time. Patricia turned back to Jonathan, and her professional mask cracked just slightly, revealing something that might have been genuine shame. Mr. West, I've arranged for our VIP suite on the 3rd floor. Private office, executive banking services, whatever you need. I've also contacted our legal team to begin drafting a formal apology and exploring appropriate compensation for— Can you reverse a foreclosure? Jonathan interrupted quietly. Patricia blinked. I'm sorry? Mercy House. It's a homeless shelter on 8th Street. Your bank holds the mortgage. They're 3 months behind on payments. The foreclosure notice went out last week. Jonathan's eyes didn't waver. Can you reverse it? Patricia pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. The lobby watched in silence as she made a call, her voice low and urgent. David, it's Patricia. I need you to pull a file immediately. Mercy House, 8th Street. Yes, the foreclosure. I want it stopped today, right now. She paused, listening. I don't care about the procedure. File an emergency stay. Restructure the loan. Forgive the debt entirely if you have to. Just make it go away. She lowered the phone, her expression carefully neutral. It's done. The foreclosure is canceled. Mercy House will receive notification within the hour. Jonathan's shoulders sagged slightly, the first sign of emotion he'd shown since the balance appeared on the screen. Thank you. Is there anything else? Patricia asked, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. Anything at all? We have champagne in the VIP suite, catered lunch from that Italian place downtown, access to our senior wealth management team who can review your portfolio, help you with— I need to make a withdrawal, Jonathan said. Patricia's relief was visible. Finally, something concrete she could do. Of course. How much were you thinking? $47,000, cash. The number was so specific, so odd, that Patricia hesitated. May I ask what it's for? Mercy House has 47 residents. They'll need security deposits for new apartments once the building is sold. First month's rent, last month's rent, some furniture. $1,000 each should help them get started somewhere safe. Margaret Ashford made a soft sound. Victoria had lowered her phone completely now, no longer recording, just watching with something that looked like shame. Patricia's professional mask fully restored. I'll have it prepared immediately. Though, Mr. West, with your account balance, we could structure something more comprehensive. A trust fund for the shelter, perhaps. Ongoing operational support. Endowment for— Later, Jonathan said. His voice was tired suddenly, the exhaustion of 20 years on the streets showing through. Right now, I just need to make sure they're safe. The rest can wait. 3 months later, the morning sun caught the glass and steel of the Meridian Tower, throwing geometric shadows across the empty lot on 8th Street where Mercy House had once stood. The building had been sold, its residents safely relocated, each with their $1,000 and a fresh start. Now the lot was surrounded by a temporary fence decorated with architectural renderings and a simple sign, Eleanor West Foundation, breaking ground today. Jonathan West stood at the edge of the platform erected for the ceremony, and if you'd passed him on the street 3 months ago, you wouldn't have recognized him. The duct-taped boots were gone, replaced by polished Oxfords that had cost less than he could afford, but more than he needed. The safety-pinned coat had been donated back to Mercy House's clothing drive. He wore a charcoal suit, one of his old ones, retrieved from storage, altered to fit a frame that had lost 30 pounds over 20 years. His face was clean-shaven, his hair cut and graying at the temples with dignity rather than neglect. But his eyes were the same, still carrying that weight, still watching. The crowd gathering for the ceremony was an odd mixture. City council members in their political best, shaking hands and posing for cameras. Architects from Jonathan's old firm, some he recognized, some too young to have known him before. Margaret Ashford sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes before the speeches had even begun. And scattered throughout the folding chairs, wearing their cleanest clothes and looking uncomfortable under the attention, were the former residents of Mercy House, 47 people who'd been saved by a man they'd known as just another lost soul sharing their space. Patricia Vasquez stood near the podium, her presence a calculated statement from First Metropolitan Bank. The institution had pledged $5 million to the foundation's endowment, a donation that had been announced with great fanfare and carefully worded press releases about recommitting to community values. She caught Jonathan's eye and nodded. He nodded back. They both understood what this was, penance wrapped in publicity, but penance nonetheless. Marcus Webb was there too, no longer in a security guard's uniform, but in a simple suit, holding a folder that contained his acceptance letter to the foundation's board. Jonathan had asked him personally. "You hesitated that day," Jonathan had told him. "That counts for something." The microphone squealed as someone adjusted it. The ceremony was about to begin. Jonathan took a breath, feeling the weight of 3 months of planning, of lawyers and architects and city permits, of phone calls with people who remembered him and people who'd thought he was dead. The foundation would provide more than just banking access. It would offer financial literacy courses, job training, mental health services, and something harder to quantify, dignity. The simple recognition that a person's worth wasn't measured by their address or the condition of their boots. A young woman approached the podium to introduce him. She'd been one of Mercy House's residents, now working as the foundation's community outreach coordinator. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke about the man who'd lived among them for 2 years, never mentioning his past, never acting superior, just existing as one of them, until the day he walked into a bank and changed everything. Jonathan stepped up to the microphone. The sun was warm on his face. He looked out at the crowd, at the cameras, at the empty lot that would soon hold a building designed to serve rather than impress. "My wife, Eleanor, believed that architecture was an act of love," he began, his voice rough but steady. "She believed that how we design our spaces reflects how we see each other, and she believed, fundamentally, that everyone deserves to be seen." He paused, his eyes finding the former Mercy House residents scattered through the crowd. 20 years ago, I lost faith in that belief. I needed to know if she was right, so I became invisible. I stripped away everything that made me visible: the name, the money, the reputation, and I asked a simple question: would anyone still see me? The crowd was silent, leaning forward. Most people didn't, and I don't blame them for that. We live in a world that teaches us to look away, to protect ourselves, to judge quickly and move on. But some people did see me. The folks at Mercy House who shared their food when they barely had enough. The nurse at the free clinic who learned my name. The librarian who saved me a seat by the heater on cold days. He looked directly at the cameras now, knowing this would be broadcast, knowing Maurice Parks might be watching from wherever he'd landed after his termination. I learned that the world contains both cruelty and compassion. Both are real, both are powerful, and we get to choose which one we amplify. Jonathan's hand rested on the podium, steady now. This foundation is my choice, Eleanor's choice. It's for everyone who's been invisible, everyone who's been judged by their appearance rather than their humanity, everyone who just needs someone to see them. He picked up the ceremonial shovel, its blade gleaming in the morning sun. Let's build something that sees people. The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. Jonathan drove the shovel into the earth, and the Eleanor West Foundation, named for a woman who believed in humanity's goodness even when her husband had stopped believing, began its work. Somewhere across town, Maurice Parks was updating his resume, trying to explain a gap in his employment history. He would find another job eventually, never in banking, never with that level of authority again. Some lessons cost everything to learn. But Jonathan West was no longer thinking about Maurice Parks. He was thinking about the building that would rise from this ground, about the people it would serve, about his wife who'd been right all along. The world was cruel sometimes, but it could also be kind. You just had to choose which world you wanted to build. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Right now, someone is being judged by their appearance. Someone is being dismissed because of where they sleep at night. Someone is being treated as invisible simply because they don't look like they belong. Hit that subscribe button if you believe everyone deserves to be seen, because we're bringing you more stories that challenge how we judge, how we see, and how we treat each other. Drop a like if Jonathan's 20-year test made you think twice about the assumptions you make every single day. And here's what I really want to know. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been judged by your appearance, or have you caught yourself judging someone else and regretted it? Share your story. This community is built on people brave enough to admit we're all learning how to see each other better. Because here's the truth, Maurice Parks exists in all of us sometimes. The question is, when that moment comes, when someone who doesn't look right crosses your path, will you be Maurice, or will you be the person Eleanor West believed we could all become? Subscribe, like, comment, choose compassion. The next story drops soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss it.